Thanks, Tom. Evening, everyone. In case you want to see where the voice is coming from, you can always put it on speaker view if you want that, or if you prefer to have a distant voice with no face attached to it, that's also perfectly fine as well. We're getting towards the end of our sermon series on the book of James. We've got one more week to go next week. And James, of course, a brother of Jesus and a leader in the New Testament church in Jerusalem. Here he is writing to his friends, his brothers and sisters, about what it means to endure through suffering. And in these last few verses in the book of James, both this week and the next week, you catch a glimpse of what is absolutely at the core of what it means to be a Christian. And next week, we'll be thinking about the prayers of faith. When you pray, stuff happens. When you pray, people are healed. When you pray, the Lord turns up. And we believe that, don't we? It's the now of the kingdom. We see the Jesus at work in our lives and in the lives of others. And this week, we're thinking about patience in suffering. If you like, if we could input these verses from verse 7 right the way through to the end into our lives, we would catch the absolute picture of what it means to live as a Christian. The prayer of faith and patience in suffering. The New Testament writers were committed to communicating that the suffering was an integral part in what it meant to follow Jesus. He was writing to say everybody is going to experience suffering. It's not whether you suffer or not, it's what you do when you suffer. And I think, as you'll have heard me say before, I think one of the greatest lies ever told in the church is that when you come to faith in Christ, that you will have all the money in the world, that you will have all the best things in the world, that you will experience all the good things in the world, and that nothing will ever happen to you that's bad. That, we know, is plainly wrong. It's not true. To live following Jesus means that we are going to experience something of the pain of the world, and that somehow in the middle of all of that, God is at work in our lives, bringing strength, healing, and perseverance. So tonight I want to show you a few pictures. There's no fancy presentation this evening, which I'm sure you'll be delighted about, but I do want to show you a few pictures. What does this picture mean to you? Just feel free to unmute and just call out. What does it mean to you?
Not being in lockdown.
Not being in lockdown. Yeah.
Holiday.
To me, it looks like it reminds me of just being distracted.
Being distracted, yeah.
I would say waiting.
Waiting, yeah.
Looking for lunch.
Looking for lunch, yeah. Waiting for lunch. It struck me when I saw that picture that actually, I mean, I thought initially it looked like maybe she'd been stood up, you know, waiting for lunch with a friend or a date, and them not showing up. Here's one of the first words that I want to mention tonight. It's in the chat, and it's the word patience. The book of James communicates what it means to live the Christian life in a way that is patient. In fact, he starts this little section by saying, "Be patient then, brothers and sisters, until Jesus comes back." The New Testament church had a real focus, thinking that Jesus was going to return imminently. And that provided them with some impetus to live the Christian life. We seem to have lost that somewhat. And yet we need to be reminded that Jesus is going to return. He's going to return back and bring all those who know and love him to be with him. And also there is that biblical reminder of judgment as well. So we know that he's going to come back. And yet in the meantime, James says, look, be patient. Live a life that is long suffering. That's what the word literally means. Hope you've got James 5 open in front of you so you can check that I'm not reading from a different book. James uses that illustration of the crop, doesn't he? He says, look, a farmer, waiting for the rains to fall is patient. There were two rains apparently in that James was mentioning, one that was around October, November, another one that was in the springtime. And James is saying, look, in between these times, be patient. And the Lord calls us, I think, to be patient and to stand firm. I think for a while, I would have thought that the key things in discipleship were about praying for healing, about sharing our faith, about, meeting with others, about church, and those things are important. But I think top of my list now would be two things. It would be patience and it would be standing firm. Patience and standing firm. What does it mean to follow Jesus when things don't seem to be going your way? What does it mean to follow Jesus when life is tough or didn't work out as you'd hoped or thought? I think we're called to keep going and to stand firm. In fact, that is the resonant message of Scripture, actually, even when things are difficult, when you're in the middle of the battle. In Ephesians 6, it just calls Christians to take their stand. And sometimes that may feel like all we can do. And maybe we need to know this evening that actually that is plenty. That is enough to just simply take our stand. Here's picture number 2. What does this mean to you?
Frustration.
Yeah.
He's looking quite angry.
Yeah. Keep going.
Lost in translation.
Yes.
Me trying to talk to Eon.
You try to talk to Eon, yeah. And it reminds you of those little moments, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We've no doubt had all those moments, haven't we? One of the things that happens, I think, in life and in the Christian life particularly, is if we don't understand that the Christian life is about patience, it's about waiting for Jesus, it's about enduring through the difficult things of life. If we don't understand that that's what the Christian journey is about, it can lead to grumbling. It can lead to an attitude that may not help us or others. And so my second word tonight is this. It's the word perspective. James writes to the church and says this, doesn't he? He says, look, the Lord's coming is near. Verse 9, don't grumble against one another, brothers and sisters. Don't grumble. The word literally means groaning. One of the most amazing noises when you go and watch a sporting occasion, if you go and watch a football match or a rugby match, is when there's a mistake and the crowd groans. Have you ever experienced that when you've been to see, a near miss, or somebody who is meant to tackle somebody and doesn't manage to do it, or an open goal and miss, and everybody goes, oh, this massive groan goes up. That's what the word here means. It means that groan. Life is tough. Things aren't right. Things aren't fair. And here James says, look, don't grumble against one another. It's often that the grumbling is focused towards others, isn't it? It's true often in churches, actually, that often when people lose sight of patience, then the grumbling and the groaning turns inward on those that happen to be nearest. It probably is true within your household that often the groaning or the grumbling falls on those who happen to be nearest to you at that particular time. And yet James says, look, don't grumble against one another. If you want to learn one of the lessons of life, it's to pause before speaking. When you know that the attitude is not quite in the right place, just to pause and count to 5 or 10 or however long it may be, just so that we just have a pause between what's in our minds and what comes out of our mouths. We were thinking about that a few weeks ago. So that's the second word. Well, first one, patience, then perspective. Just remember that the person that we're about to speak to is loved by the Lord, that the person we're about to speak to is his and not ours. be patient, and then take some perspective. Here's my third picture. What does this picture speak to you about?
For me, I guess it's being alone.
Yeah, isolated.
For me, it's bravery that is up there at all.
Yeah.
It's going to be really fun to run down.
Yeah, or roll down. Have you ever done that? Just kind of just rolling down. Yeah, perfect. I did that once with my kids. I must have been in my 30s when I did it, and I can remember people looking at me like I was crazy. Like, I think your kids are meant to be the ones rolling down the hill, not you. But there we go.
Sense of place.
Sense of place, yeah.
I would say posing.
Posing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here's that picture of this woman on a sand dune, actually in the middle of the desert. And when I first looked at it, I thought, oh gosh, it looks like a lonely picture. And then you realize she's standing with her hands on her hips, with a sense of kind of sass about her, I think, as she stands on this sand dune and is walking through the desert. Here's my third word this evening. It's the word perseverance. It's there in the chat. That as Christians, we're called to be patient, to have perspective, and to persevere. James, when he's writing, he reminds them of the story of Job. He said, you've heard of Job's perseverance. Of course, it would have been a famous story as it is now. And Job, what summarized his life more than anything else is the word perseverance. He kept going. He kept moving. Too often, I think in churches, we hear sermons about the patience of Job, or even actually, people will describe it, oh, they've got the patience of Job. Well, if you read the story of Job, I don't think he was actually overwhelmed with patience. I mean, I think patience seems like far too passive a word. There is, I think, as you read through the story, a sense that Job was anything but patience. We read all the drama in his life. We see him passionately resenting what's come about in his life. We see him passionately questioning all the conventional arguments of his so-called friends. You remember Job's comforters. We see him passionately agonizing over the terrible thought that God might have forsaken him. Job was a passionate perseverer. And I think we're called to be the same, to be passionate perseverers. That means when life is tough, we need each other. That means when life is tough, we need Jesus. We need to know him in our life. We need to experience him through the ups and downs of all that happens to us. And I think probably above everything else, we need to persevere by spending time with those who have persevered. That's the thing that's helped me most through life's ups and downs, is to know that there are others who have persevered. I don't anymore want to spend time with Christians for whom everything has been fantastically wonderful. I want to spend time with Christians who've been through the mill and stood firm and come out the other side, and even those for whom life is still difficult and painful. It's the reality side by side of patience in suffering and the prayer of faith. Those things stand side by side in Scripture. So that's my third word, and you'll be glad there's only 14 to go. No, only 4 words that I'm sharing tonight. So the fourth picture is this. What does this mean to you? Can you see the words on the book?
Good read.
Yeah.
I think of Kintsugi Hope.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah, well, exactly. It is actually, isn't it, the kind of the same sentiment of Kintsugi, the strength in our scars. And the fourth and final word this evening is the word promise. It's that sense of what does it mean to know that Jesus is with you? And that last verse of verse 12 of James 5, it just says, above all, my brothers and sisters, do not swear, nor by heaven or earth. All you need to say is a simple yes or no. And it's that sense of what James was writing to these early Christians and saying, look, you may well want to look to other places. You may want to swear by a son, or to swear by an image, or to swear by your parents, or to swear by your children. Have you ever heard people say that? I swear on my children's life. I swear on my parents' life. And yet James is saying here, look, don't do that. Let your yes be all you need to say is a simple yes or a simple no. And actually in our Christian life, it's about saying a simple yes to Jesus. I really love the quote somebody shared once with me. They said this, you don't really know Jesus is all you need until Jesus is all you have. And I think, or somebody said to me once, when you come to the end of yourself, you discover the beginning of God. And in a sense, suffering does that in us. I don't think God ever sends it. I don't think God inflicts people with illness or with pain or with bereavement. But I think God does turn these things around and says, look, in this moment, will you persevere? In this moment, will you hold on to me? In this moment, will you remember that I am all you need? And so those 4 words tonight out of James 5, patience as we go through difficult things, perspective, not turning our focus towards grumbling or groaning, but to turn them back to Jesus, perseverance, where we need one another as we stand alongside each other. And in a sense, that's what Kintsugi is all about. If you've not been part of a Kintsugi group, then here's a moment in the next few days to sign up for the ones that are happening. You'll discover amazing sustenance actually from standing with others and saying, do you know what, I have scars, and I want to share them and see them in the life of other people. And then the promise that we are called to simply say yes to Jesus, to follow him, to live for him. And just in case we think that somehow this message about suffering is a marginalized message out at the sides of Christianity, we need to remember this evening, in a moment, we're going to share bread and we're going to share wine. These symbols remind us that suffering is at the heart of what it means to be a Christian. We follow the Jesus who suffered, who was emptied of his glory so that we might receive it from him, who died on a cross, rising again so that we might experience his hope through difficult and painful times in our lives. Jesus came to suffer and to die in order that we wouldn't have to. And I love what Paul said to the Philippian church. Did this ever strike you when Paul was writing to the Philippians about what it meant to be a Christian? He said this, he said, I want to know Christ in his sufferings. I think it's a fascinating thing, isn't it? Unthought about, probably, to know Christ in his sufferings. When we take the bread and the wine tonight, we're saying, I want to know Christ in his sufferings, and I want to know that he can bring me through mine and out the other side, to know that there is hope beyond. As we head into our next moments, just going to leave you with that thought that actually we are called to follow the Lord who suffered. and that he brings us hope in the middle of our trials. So here are 3 questions in the breakout rooms. Questions. What makes you impatient and why? Share examples of how you have persevered in difficult times. And lastly, take a moment just to pray for each other and use verse 11, which is from James 5. So there we go.